Welcome, everyone, to the sixth and I believe final meeting of the Committee on Rulemaking to consider our project on public engagement and agency rulemaking under the good cause exemption. I'll begin as I always do with the roll call. I will call two rolls. The first will be the names of committee members and their alternates. After each name is called, the person should say here so we can make sure their mics are working. Second roll will be the names of ACUS members who are not on the committee and their alternates. After each name is called, you should say here so we can make sure your mic is working. I won't call the names of members of the public who don't have speaking privileges. First, committee members. Laura Barheit.
Here.
Great. Emily Bremer. Amy Bunk.
Here.
Great. Is Seth Davis here? I didn't see him, but. Okay, no Seth Davis. Alex, or I saw Bill Funk.
Here.
Great. Alex Goodenough.
Here.
Great. Saw Michael Hertz.
Here.
Okay. Who else do we have? David Pritzker.
Here.
Great. Lon Smith.
Here. Here.
Thanks, Lon. Kevin Stack.
Here.
Daniel Weiss.
Here.
Great. Is there anybody on the committee whose name I did not call? Oh yeah, Tom Sussman, I think I saw.
Here.
Great.
And I think I was left out. Andrew Emery.
Oh, Andrew, thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else on the committee whose name I didn't call? Okay, great. So other ACUS members, Jeff Lubbers, I saw.
I'm here.
Great. Do we have Matt Weiner? No. Ron Levin.
Here.
Great. Erica Lunder for Mohamed Mesbahi.
Here.
Great. Did I miss anybody else that is an ACUS member but not on the committee?
I think that's me, Annalise Marchessault for Dan Cohen.
Oh, great. Sorry,
Morning.
Mr. Weiss. Anyone else? All right, I'll turn it over to Bertrand.
Hello, everyone. To our sixth meeting on this public engagement and agency rulemaking under the good cause exemption. I'll read the script one final time with feeling. Please note that only ACUS members, including government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternates have full speaking privileges. To avoid background noise, though, I'd ask that you keep your microphone on mute and either use Zoom's hand raise feature or add a comment in the chat feature if you'd like to speak. I'll then call on you and you can unmute yourself. Please then remute yourself when you're done. I also ask that ACUS members and their designated alternates use a webcam to facilitate conversation. With respect to attendees other than ACUS members and alternates, participation requires the unanimous consent of the committee members. Time permitting, I'll consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points and will presume that committee members consent absent their raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please so indicate in the chat feature or by using Zoom's hand raise feature and wait to speak until I call on you. You can then unmute yourself and please remute yourself when you're done speaking. For all participants, please use the chat feature only to indicate that you'd like to speak, or for committee members and their alternates to vote when asked. Please do not hold any sidebar discussions or put substantive comments in the chat feature. Only members of the Committee on Rulemaking, including government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, have a vote. Please do not vote unless you're a member of the committee. We have a list of committee members in case you're unsure. And so today we're going to proceed as follows. We're going to start with the preamble and work through the preamble. And then we will go back to parts of the recommendation that have been revised based on input from all of you and for which there are comments about, and we'll engage those. My hope is that we'll be able to get through the preamble during the first hour and then address the additional comments regarding recommendations during the second hour. So as per our norm for our last couple of meetings, we will focus on changes that are more about the spirit of change rather than wordsmithing in interest of time. And I'd ask you to keep your comments as brief as appropriate when commenting on any parts of the preamble or the recommendations going forward. I do acknowledge that to the extent that there are needed discussions that are elaborate, they'll just have to be elaborate, and we'll just have to work through them as quickly as we can to get to a conclusion. Okay. So without further ado, we'll kind of start with the preamble, and what we'll do with the preamble is go paragraph by paragraph. And then I'll give you all about 30 seconds to a minute to read each paragraph, and then we'll ask for comments or suggestions after that 30 seconds to 1 minute period. Ben, do you mind making that a little bit bigger?
Oh yeah,
for us
sorry, my
to
apologies.
see?
And I did just want to mention, I meant to mention this at the outset. Unfortunately, Mark, our consultant is not able to make it today, so we will not be able to benefit from his expertise. So he had a pre-existing commitment, so he apologizes for that.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Okay, so we'll work through paragraph 1, which is lines 1 through 10. Okay, so we'll start with Alex.
Thanks. A couple edits to this paragraph, one relatively simple one in line 8 to add generally before requiring, so that it would read APA recognizes the value of public participation in rulemaking by generally requiring agencies to publish.
Okay.
It's pretty self-explanatory.
Yep.
Just recognizing there are exceptions to that.
Right.
The second comment, this would be in addition to the end of the paragraph. So OMB believes that these recommendations are policy recommendations and not necessarily recommendations to reduce legal risk. Accordingly, we suggest to add a sentence to the end of this paragraph stating that fact, that here's our suggested language. So something along the lines of these recommendations constitute policy recommendations to agencies and are not recommendations to reduce legal risk. These recommendations constitute policy recommendations to agencies and are not recommendations to reduce legal risk.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Jeff.
I'm not sure I like that last addition, but I was going to suggest on the sentence that was the original last sentence, just clarifying to say, provide interested persons an opportunity to provide written comments on rulemaking proposals.
Okay. So in the last 9 to provide written comments. Okay. All right. So we have 3 set of suggested edits, 2 by Alex and 1 by Jeff. Of course, you could add more or comment on the suggestions that are made. Ron.
You're muted.
You're mute, Ron. Still mute, Ron.
Still muted.
There you go.
Okay. So I don't disagree with Alex's proposal, but I think it's in the wrong place. Later on, we have a paragraph that says specifically, these are best practices recommendations. Beginning at line 63.
Okay.
Well, probably it belongs somewhere in there.
Okay. So we'll come back to line 63, but you're fine with including that language somewhere in this preamble, Ron?
Right, but not the first paragraph.
Okay. So suggested move to line 63 or thereabouts. David.
Oops, the sentence just moved out of my sight, but it's not a long sentence and it has the long word recommendations 3 times. Can we get rid of at least one of them by saying, if I could see it again.
Yeah, what's coming back up for you, David? Okay, here we are.
And are not intended to reduce legal risk.
Are not intended to reduce. Okay. So changing that language, recommendations are not intended. Okay. And Alex, do you consider that a friendly amendment? Is that still comport with?
Yeah, I think I treat both of those as friendly amendments, so I'm
Okay.
okay with moving it further down in the preamble and with that tweak to not have, as noted, recommendations 3 times in the sentence.
Okay, great. So we will remove it from this paragraph for now, and then we'll have it down and we'll revisit where it should go in the paragraph that's part of line 63. Any other comments on paragraph 1 or objections to the changes that have been proposed? Okay, so let's move to paragraph 2, which is line 11. I don't know if we'll get it all on the screen. We'll see. Line 11 through 23. Alex.
Again, a relatively minor wording addition just to acknowledge broader exceptions. So suggest to add among other exceptions before APA, before the APA in line 13.
Okay.
For this reason, among other exceptions, the
exceptions.
APA.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Any other comments or suggested revisions or objections to the proposed revision? Jeff.
I wonder if it's worth citing the provision of the APA. For this reason, the APA section 553, what is it, BB?
Okay.
I will say that I'm sure everybody knows that the APA technically doesn't exist anymore. You know, I mean, it's not, it was it was codified in section Title V and so forth, but you know, we all talk about it as if it still exists. So,
Do we account for that recodification, or do you
well,
think?
so it was it was put into Title V in 1966 when, and Title V was also enacted as positive law, and so technically we're just amending Title V of the U.S. Code. We're not amending the APA, or you know, but conventionally we all talk about it as if it's still there.
Right.
It's just a little technically inaccurate to say section 553 or any section of the APA, but again, yeah, I don't think we need to worry about that.
Okay.
You're raising some very deep issues. You know, the APA, assuming it exists.
Right, exactly.
Existential question.
Absolutely. Okay.
And Jeff, did you have a preference about in terms of inserting a site to 553? Did you prefer it to be at the end of the, just add it to the existing footnote at the end of the sentence, or to insert one in the earlier part of the sentence?
For this reason, the APA permits, you could say the APA and maybe put it in a parentheses there or something like that, or section 5. You could just say section 553B, I guess, would be enough.
Okay.
Line 13.
Line 13, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Alex.
So I don't object to Jeff's proposal, but I think it might negate the need for the language that I added. So if we're going to have a specific reference to the relevant section of the APA, we may not need that among other exceptions language.
Right. Okay. All right. So we'll make that adjustment to it, including the particular statutory provision, perhaps it's deleting the among other exceptions as appropriate. Okay. Other comments on paragraph 2? Okay, so let's move to paragraph 3, lines 24 through 28. And we have a comment from Michael on these lines that I don't know if he wants to elaborate on what he wrote.
Well, I have no particular objection to the paragraph as written. It's a little bland and it's a little empty. And I thought that we might sort of grapple with as I said, grapple with the issues a little more than this does. So there's not some fundamental substantive alteration I'm proposing. It just seems to me clearer and more complete to have something along the language that I've set out.
Okay, so why don't we put that language below the current 24 to 28 to just have folks here on the committee wrestle with it, if we could, and see if there are
I'll just say the first sentence in what I have is taken from a paragraph a little further down.
Okay, so we'll delete that
If-
sentence from the paragraph further down. Okay. Bill.
I like Michael's language.
Okay. I agree. I like the addition as well. Or the replacement, I guess. Any objections to substituting out the current language for Michael's proposed language? I'll give you guys a chance to read it since I shouldn't have seen that. Okay, so we will substitute out that language and include the language that Michael's added. Jeff?
I like the language. I just think the first sentence is a little bit repetitive of the first paragraph because we've already talked about the conference recognizing a lot of these things in the first paragraph. So I don't know if we need to say it again.
Okay.
But that's just, I don't have a solution, but I just,
Yeah,
seems a little repetitive.
got it. So we'll kind of revise and make more cohesive with the first paragraph to avoid repetitiveness here. Okay, Bill?
I don't think it's repetitive. The first sentence says we like notice and comment rulemaking. This says we like to do more than notice and comment rulemaking. So I think this is a new idea. It's not just repeating first paragraph.
Got it. Thanks, Bill. Daniel?
That direct final rulemaking does involve some sort of notice and comment, so I wouldn't say foregoing notice and comment.
Foregoing notice and comment. And which line are we talking about here?
At the very bottom,
Okay,
line 40.
40, okay. Got it.
How about foregoing notice and comment rulemaking? I mean, that's a term of art.
Before going notice of common rulemaking, would that be satisfying for you, Daniel, or do you still think it's problematic?
I don't know. I don't think that's what's in 553. It describes the process, but I don't know why we need to say that because we've already described what invoking the good cause exception means.
Okay. Okay.
I think
So you would just cut it off after the public and just leave out that last part of the sentence starting with even.
Yeah, you could say usefully engages the public. Period. Or you could say even when conducting rulemaking under the good cause exception.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Daniel. Michael.
Alternatively, even when foregoing standard notice and comment.
conducting rulemaking or even under standard.
Or you know, actually looking at, how about even when, this may be what Daniel just said, you know, even when relying on the good cause exception. How about
Okay. Yeah, so Daniel's language would be even conducting rulemaking under the good cause
No.
exception.
even may usefully engage the public even when relying on the good cause exception.
Okay,
Yeah, I think that's fine.
that's good. Okay,
I-
so why
yeah,
don't we go with relying on the good cause exception?
yeah, and just
Right. Sounds good. Okay. Any other comments on new paragraph, I guess 3 and 4?
There's a missing hyphen on line 31. Notice and comment.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay. All right, so let's move down to the paragraph starting at line 41. And this kind of re-engages our discussion of the idea of final rules and whether we want to acknowledge those as things in existence, I guess. I mean, it's clear that agencies use final rules as noted in our last meeting, and so the question is whether we want to recognize those in the language that we use in this recommendation is part of what's going on here, but there's other edits as well, so I'll give you a chance to read them. Okay, Ron.
So in the vicinity of 50 to 52, I think what we want to suggest here is that the agency, when they request comments at the time that they announce the interim rule, I think we want to say they pledge to consider them in light of the comments received. Not they might. I mean, the whole model assumes that you're requesting the comments and they say they're going to take them into account and consider whether to reaffirm it or change it. Now, I had some language that fit the prior text. I don't know if it fits this text, but it's here. What it says now in 51 is the agency may later replace the published rule. That's correct in that it might be the same rule, but
So would your language be like, would it be shall, or the agency says will pledge to later replace, or
well, let's see. I guess now they request public comment on a final rule at the same time it's published, which with the pledge that the agency will consider the published rule, will reaffirm or modify or replace the published rule in light of comments.
So with the pledge that the agency will reaffirm or replace the published rule.
Yeah, it's not very well phrased.
Okay.
As I stated, but I think you see the idea.
Yeah, I do.
That they're saying, sending your comments, we might do something with them.
Right.
And the idea should be sending your comments, and we'll treat that
right
as something we've agreed to consider at stage 2.
Got it.
How you phrase it, I think we may not need to hassle about.
Yes. Okay. Any responses to Ron's comment, capturing this general spirit without necessarily wordsmithing? Bill.
I mean, it's sort of wordsmithing, but I don't like the word pledge. But I think would be along the lines of the agency later reaffirms, replaces, or modifies the published rule in light of these comments. In other words, it's just like in the previous sentence, something they do. And this is something they do. The agency later does this. All right, they don't pledge to do it. We don't say they pledge to do it. They do it. It's just
But
a descriptive statement.
they don't always do it.
Well, I know, but the idea is that this is the preamble, all right? And we say this is what is supposed to happen. This is the process. I mean, it says sometimes use final, sometimes do this, all right? They would say the agency later replaces, reaffirms, replaces, or modifies in light of the comments.
Okay. So reaffirm, replaces, modifies in light of the comments. Okay.
Don't take a may later. It's the agency later.
The agency later replaces, reaffirms, or modifies the published rule in light of the comments.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can take out the final rule, which is the funny language anyway.
Right. Okay. So
that's in lieu of with a pledge that.
Right. Okay, so would you consider that a friendly amendment, Ron, or do you still? It's
amicable. I don't know about friendly. I would have preferred the other, but I can have a friendly relationship with this. I mean, no. More seriously, I think we ought to communicate the idea that the model contemplates that they will do it.
Okay.
So I wouldn't call it exactly descriptive, but I'm not sure it's all that different from what Bill is saying.
Okay. Any comments, feedback, or objections to the edits? Both others are contained in paragraph starting with line 41, or the one we're particularly talking about on line 51 and 52.
I don't have a suggestion yet, but to my mind, the underlined line, the agency later reaffirms, modifies, or replaces, somehow the syntax doesn't seem right following what's before the semicolon.
Okay. So we'll try to create more coherence here to make it more readable. All right.
So maybe we should say solicits them at the time it's published for the purpose of considering whether to reaffirm, modify, or replace.
Okay.
Would that satisfy you, Bill?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Hey, could you just give me that one more time? I'll write it down.
After published, and without a semicolon, for the purpose of considering whether to reaffirm, modify, or replace in light of the comments.
Adding a 2 before the reaffirms.
I don't have any particular problem, but it's even less, I think, affirmative than mine, though. But I don't have an objection to it. If you're happy with it, Ron, I'm happy with it.
Okay. I mean, you could go with request a public comment on the final rule at the same time the rule is published for the purpose of reaffirming, modifying, or replacing the published rule in light of those comments.
Bill, what's your reservation?
Well, it doesn't say that they will do it, all right? It's for the purpose of considering.
Yeah.
I mean, this is preambular language. I don't want to get too tied up in it. I just didn't like pledging because I didn't. That was a new idea that they would pledge something.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, well, why don't we go with what's on the screen? It's a little bit imperfect, but not far off.
I like moving on.
All right, second.
Any other comments on paragraphs starting on line 41 through 55? Okay, we'll scroll down to the next paragraph. Oh, Jeff, sorry.
Sorry. Just to, if you go back up for a second, where we were, I do think there is a point that we need to resolve here, because considering whether to reaffirm, modify, or replace, they're going to have to do one of the three, right? So it's not considering whether to do these, it's
How about deciding?
that might be better, yeah, deciding whether to,
Okay,
or determining whether to, or something like that.
got it. Any other comments on this paragraph? Okay, so let's move down to the next paragraph starting in line 56. So Michael,
So in light of the changes we made in paragraph 3, this first sentence should be struck.
right?
Footnote 7 should be moved to paragraph 3.
Got it.
And then the sentence should be replaced with some sort of transition sentence from the prior paragraph. I think the two paragraphs still flow perfectly smoothly, but something along the lines of, you know, the conference has addressed these mechanisms in prior recommendations.
Thanks, Michael.
To be fiddled with by the Committee on Style.
Sure. This gives us a good start, though. Other comments regarding paragraphs starting at line 56? Let's move forward to the paragraph starting on line 70 and going through 75. Ron.
The last sentence purports to characterize the 2020 decision. I think you could do a little more precisely if you replace at the end subsequent final rules with an ensuing final or replacement rule. Now, we got to resolve the diction question of final, which, like Bill, I don't care a lot for. So replacement rule or successor rule might be better, but final sounds a little bit cute, but it sounds okay. So that's the point that the committee should resolve. But regardless, final would be another in those options.
Ensuing replacement.
So it should be requirements for an ensuing final rule.
Requirements for and ensuing.
Because what you're doing is completing in the court's analysis, notice and comment procedure for the same rulemaking.
Bill.
Not and, ensuing.
Yeah,
In line 74. It says a request for comments on an interim final rules period, plural. It should be on an interim final rule. Take off the S.
yeah.
Yeah, one of the challenges here is that the Little Sisters case involved multiple IFRs, but it's kind of a challenging to. Sounds a little weird when you use the plural here, and I think it changed a couple times, so that's the reason for the typo.
Would
So
you say
technically,
it's
the case involved multiple IFRs.
a set of interim final rule?
Well, then do request for comments on interim final rules.
Well, Ben, was there only the one that was at issue here?
I think both. I think there were two, and I think they were both at issue. I mean, I think there was a question about whether both were consistent with the, APA's rulemaking provisions.
Oh, so they said that both of them had a procedural problem apart from the.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I can go back and check.
I think it's confusing to say plural in the first instance and singular in the second. Or to say, and I think it's even more confusing to say and interim final rules. So I think we just should make the whole thing, what the decision, the actual decision was may have involved multiple interim final rules, but the holding is that an interim final rule satisfies the APA's notice and comments requirement for an ensuing replacement final rule. I mean, that's what the holding is.
I think that's right.
Right.
So, yeah, that's fine.
Other comments on 70 through 75, including preferences as to how to characterize the subsequent rule? Alex.
So I was actually going to comment on footnote 9 in line 72, and I'm not going to be so helpful as to suggest any sources, but I note that the sources in footnote 9 are a little bit dated, so it might make sense just to double check whether there's a more recent source that could be added to better support that sentence.
Got it.
But again, not so helpful as to have something at the tip of my tongue.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Alex. Jeff.
And maybe this is where we need Mark to come to be here, but I went back and looked at that GAO study just to see whether it supported the sentence, and it did. And so I didn't criticize the sentence, but I wasn't quite sure that it's been increasingly that agencies have been relying more frequently on the good cause exemption. That report seemed to support it. I mean, there was an old study by Juan Lavilla that showed back in the 80s, I think, that showed that agencies were doing it a lot. But the GAO study seemed to say that they were doing it more, at least as of 2012. So, and I think the CRS study basically harked back to the GAO study. So I just not sure we're going to find a source that says that they're doing it more frequently than they were in 2012. So it may be hard to find.
I thought Mark's study relied on a more recent one. That was his reasoning. I checked the report. In other words, I think you may find support there.
Right. Okay. We'll look at Mark's report. We'll also talk to Mark himself to see if he has any suggestions or if he has a basis for agreeing with the 2012 report or an updated version of that at least. Any other comments on 70 through 76 or 75?
So what was the decision made or as to whether to get rid of the term final rule?
I think there is a strong divisions, perhaps more against including that language final rule. I think that if I'm characterizing appropriately, that there,
I personally think it sounds silly.
yeah, I think that there's many that agree with you on the committee, although I won't, describe it as unanimous, but we haven't used it before, or we've been trying to avoid using it throughout this report and recommendation.
Well, that's why I'd like to encourage a committee decision at this point so that we can either get rid of it everywhere or
Okay.
punt.
Okay. So why don't we address that question? We have different ways of characterizing the subsequent rule that are in line 75. Jeff?
I mean, I think I was one of the ones who suggested using it because I think some agencies are using it. And I think if final rule is silly, why isn't interim final rule silly?
Fair. Bill?
I don't have a real objection to final rule. It's something that people refer to, all right? It's a shorthand for it. But to the extent we don't need to use that language, I think it's better to avoid using it. I mean, it's inside the Beltway language, and I think using normal English would be better.
That's exactly what I was trying to express. Thank you, Bill.
If it's helpful too, I can scroll down to, because ACUS staff in connection with modifying recommendations 8 and 9 tried to come up with some language that reflected the committee's discussions last meeting. And we used the term new rule that reaffirms, modifies, or withdraws. I can go down to that language now, but we'll probably have that debate when we get back down to those recommendations.
Yeah. I think we should just be consistent here. So we use new rules below. So maybe we use new rules here, or
I can scroll down if it's helpful.
Oh, no, new rules, I think, would imply you're starting from scratch as opposed to extending the present proceeding. I think final might be as good as we're going to get if you put it in quotation marks.
I guess it's a new final rule suggests that, yeah. Okay, so whatever language we use, we just have to be consistent. I think we should just be consistent here. So I don't know if we want to use replacement, successor, or other alternatives that have been proposed. There's objection or concern raised about a new final rule that Ron has pointed out. There's of course,
I have used replacement in the past, but of course, if you stand by the same rule, then replacement might not communicate it very well.
Right. Michael?
I don't have strong feelings. I'm happy with replacement, but the main thing is, A, as people have said, to be consistent, but B, to define it, and probably define it in the actual, not just in the preamble, but in the text of the recommendation, because often people just look at the recommendation.
Sure.
And I would use the phrase final in the definition, because that is what people, is the term that's used. But if we define replacement rule as to describe it, mention that this means the same as final, and leave it at that, I think I'm totally comfortable with that. I don't like new. New misses the point.
What about successor? How do people feel about successor? So we have successor and replacement that seem to be in contention unless someone wants to speak up for new. Jeff?
Well, I was
or add another one, I guess.
No, I don't like replacement because it may not be a replacement. It may be the same text, and then in which case it's a final version of the same text. So, I think if we use quotation marks, it's pretty clear that the successor to an interim final rule is a final rule.
And so you suggest using the language final rule here as okay.
So another possibility would be a replacement rule, which may or may not be the same as the original rule.
So wordy, though.
True.
Elena?
Okay, I was having some technical problems earlier, so I was joining a little bit late. I just want to confirm, we're talking about a final rule that finalizes the requirements in the interim final rule, correct?
Correct.
And maybe we can just say something like that this satisfies the notice and comment requirements for the rule finalizing the requirements in the interim. I've never used final rule, but I don't do a lot of interim rules either, so.
Yeah.
Like maybe there's just a more descriptive way to refer to what we're talking about instead of trying to kind of come up with a name for it.
Okay. So we could be descriptive here rather than coming up with a label. David?
One of my considerations on matters like this has always been how will our human successors understand and interpret these things. And I would fully expect there will be people who will look at this in the future and say, oh, it's a misprint.
The final. Right.
That's why it's important to me to make sure that will not happen.
Not if it's in quotation marks.
Yeah, so the alternative is kind of put the first final in quotation. So less likely to be understood to be a misprint. Does that help, David?
To my sense, minimally.
Okay. Annalise?
Just adding that my agency, my department also, to my knowledge, does not use the term final rule. We just say finalize the rulemaking, the action finalizing the rulemaking.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay, so comments on interim final rules satisfy the APA's notice and comment requirements for finalizing the rulemaking. Would that be the language, Annalise?
Yeah, even Leonard Leo. No, it's for a satisfied the APA's notice and comment requirements for a rule that finalizes the interim final rule.
Right. Yeah. Or the action.
For the rule that finalizes the interim final rule. Oh, this is the plan.
Okay.
Somebody tell Tom Sussman to put himself on mute.
Yeah, do you have the capability of muting Tom, John, Ben?
Yeah, I can mute him.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Okay, so I don't know, did you capture that language, Ben, in terms of for a rule finalizing the interim final rulemaking?
Yeah, I have that here. So we're gonna.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got
so
it.
we're gonna.
Got it. Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't see it at first. All right. Andrew.
Well, I think I'm maybe perhaps just confused here. At first, I was going to comment on and something I mentioned the other day that the final rule may if the agency is not actually changing any regulatory text, they're just dealing with comments and giving notice to the public that thanks for your comments, everything's the project's over. They often have called it a final rule disposition of comments. I usually think people call it a final rule if they actually are making some regulatory changes based on comments that came in from the IFR. But if they're not, just calling it a final rule disposition of comments. But here, what we're talking about is that the court held that the IFR, in this case, satisfied the requirements of a proposed rule, not that it satisfied the requirements of a final rule. And there, I think, at least the more logical rationale for what the court was doing was saying that it was sort of harmless error. But here it seems like I'm a little confused. Like the sentence ending here would be it satisfies the notice comment requirements for a proposed rule, not for a final rule.
I think Andrew's right.
Actually, I don't think so.
Nope.
That is, I mean, if they had adopted a final rule without any proposal, right, would say they didn't satisfy the requirements for a proposed rule to adopt a final rule. The question is this final rule valid, right? Not whether there has to be after the interim final rule a rule that is adopted. I mean, it can't just be a statement in the Federal Register that says thanks you for our comments. We like what we published before, right? That wouldn't satisfy what was done in Little Sisters. I mean, they have to adopt a rule. So I think it's, you need to have notice and comment for a final rule. And the notice and comment, the interim final rule satisfies the notice and comment requirements for adopting a final rule. So I mean, we can argue about whether it's replacement, successful, final rule that finalizes, those are all just language words. I don't care one way or the other. But I don't think you want to mess around with the rest of that sentence.
I think that's sort of the problem, because I started my point with that. I'm a little bit confused because it's either saying one of two things, but they're not mutually exclusive. That it satisfied the APA's notice and comment requirements for a proposed rule, which would then lead to a final rule, which is sort of what you're suggesting. Or, another way of saying it, which sort of satisfy the notice and comment requirements, that could lead to a final rule, which I think what you're suggesting, but basically they're saying the same thing. But the interim final rule in that case was treated as if it was adequate as a proposed rule, and they did do a follow-up rule. And usually the follow-up notice, if they're not changing any regulatory text, it is saying the final rule, the interim final rule published on such a date was effective. In that case, it was effective actually like a week prior to publication of the IFR, which made it such a particularly silly case. But they pretended it was an NPRM. And so, I think the follow-up document doesn't need to say much. If you respond to comments, significant issues, and you wouldn't have any reg text if you're not changing the reg text, and you would just say the document published on this date was final, satisfied the good cause requirements, it was effective on whatever the date was published in the prior document. Any response to comments, and project's over. It might not be that long a document. And certainly there's nothing under the APA that required it to be a long document, because under the APA, the project was already over when they published the IFR.
Well, it was over when it was IFR, but only good if it was, if the good cause exception applied. That whole point of Little Sisters is they didn't care about the good cause exception because the agency had adopted a final rule, a final. So they didn't care whether the interim final rule was a valid rule. So what we're saying is we want them to adopt a rule. It could be the same language. It could be just say we are adopting as a final rule what we adopted, what we proposed as an interim final rule.
So I think Bill is right that Little Sisters says overall everything the agency did collectively satisfied notice and comment requirements, but the sentence refers only to the request for comments. So to that extent, I would go with Andrew's approach of saying the request for comments on the interim final rule effectively satisfied the APA's notice requirement for a for finalizing the proceeding. They use the Annalise version. You don't need to use the hated terminology.
Okay. So we're finalizing the IFR or finalizing the proceeding?
Well, I think you could use the approach that says finalizing the proceeding or the rulemaking. And then I would say effectively satisfied, because he's really saying it is substantially equivalent. And rather than notice and comment, I would say APA's requirements for a proposed rule. Well, let's see.
I wish we wouldn't spend so much time on this one sentence here, but how about just say, particularly a 2020 decision by the Supreme Court, period.
There have been legal assistance.
With a footnote to the case, but rather than trying to characterize it, I mean, just we're wasting so much time here on this point.
Okay. There are no other comments. We will work
Well,
with.
I do have a comment on the syntax of line 74.
Okay.
The use of the past tense satisfied toward the end of line 74 suggests that we're talking about what happened in this case, in the little sister's case. At the beginning of the line, saying a request on an interim final rule talks in general. So make it one way or the other. If we want to make it clear that we're talking about the holding in this case about this case, then change it to the request on the interim final rule. Otherwise, make it satisfies.
So I think maybe we should try Bill's approach, except we could say a 2020 decision by the Supreme Court on interim final rulemaking.
Okay.
So we aren't being totally obscure, but minimalism may be the answer here.
Okay. So take out all the language that we've been fussing over and just full stop there. Delete everything else. Any objection to that change?
So we're not going to summarize what the decision was?
That was his point, I think.
Yes.
Not unless you want to spend another hour.
Well, no, all I was suggesting was just decide one way or the other. Are we talking about this case?
I
Or are we talking
understand,
about the
David.
general
I
rule?
understand, David. The point
Yeah,
is
we have
there's all
agreement. I think
sorts
we
of
have-
problems with the
Yeah, I think we have
Yeah.
agreement on that point, David. It's just the other parts of it that we're struggling with. And the question is whether we want to continue to struggle with it or just, you know,
And all it's doing is saying why the conference revisited. And I think it's probably an historical fact.
yeah.
One reason is that there was this case, which it turns out we aren't really addressing in this recommendation at all, but it's probably true that that
Right.
was the reason why it was launched.
Right. Right. Jeff.
We had a,
Jeff, you're
I
muted.
mean, we could perhaps cite something else besides the name of the case. There's been some commentary on the case. Professor Hickman, wrote some blog posts about it.
only if you cite my article rebutting that one, which I don't think you want to
Well,
do.
then we can cite your article too. I mean, it's
No,
okay.
it's only saying this is why we launched it.
all right.
Yeah. It's for very limited.
I mean, Hickman's article said something like, "Did Little Sisters gut the rulemaking process?" It's pretty.
Right.
I move deleting the language that's been identified here.
Okay. Okay. So why don't we just delete that language and then any objections? Okay. Moving forward to the next paragraph, starting on paragraph 76. And the last paragraph of the preamble, 76 through 84.
Sorry to interrupt people too, but I forgot we also need to add Alex's language here. Folks want to add that to the end of
Oh yeah, that's right. Thank you.
the paragraph we're reviewing. So just don't forget about that.
Okay, yes, that's
Yeah.
great.
You can put it after the first sentence. And then say, begin the next one by saying the recommendation also encourages.
We'll put it also at the very end.
Yeah, I was thinking at the very end as well.
Either, let's not hassle that.
Put it at the very end.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I
let's
don't feel strongly either way.
yeah, propose putting it at the very end on line 84.
Thought you agreed with my earlier suggestion to replace the third recommendations with intended.
Okay. So we would put it at the end and then
Or
replace
not intended to reduce.
or not intended. And so, yeah.
So sorry, was there agreement on where to insert
So
it?
agreements on the end, put it at the very end after the last word on line 84, add it there, then delete the last reference to recommendation and change to intended.
Especially since we used the word recommendation twice in the previous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you should put it before this sentence, the last sentence, because when you say these recommendations, that's recommendations 83, 95 that are being superseded. So these recommendations should come on line 83 before recommendations 83, 82.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And add the language intended after not at the end of 83.
I believe we changed this language here. I just can't remember exactly what we said, but if folks aren't okay with this intended language, let me know.
Any other comments on this paragraph? Final paragraph. Okay. All right, so why don't we scroll down to the parts of the recommendation for which we have additional discussions about I think 4D. So 4D was a question. I guess we want to start with 3.
Yeah, and so Michael
Yeah.
can chime in, but some of these comments from him, they post-dated our consideration of these recommendations, and so I kept them because I don't think we had a chance to address them when we first looked at this text.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. So why don't we start with 3 and the comments from Michael to see if he is satisfied with the adjustments to 3 that have been made.
Or we didn't make any
No,
adjustments. I just-
no adjustments have been made. Yeah.
Oh, no
Yeah,
adjustments.
So if you just read that last sentence, the agency should consider providing an additional period for comment if needed for fair consideration of the comments. And the addition of a period for comment is for the benefit of potential commenters who need more time to submit them. It has nothing to do with the consideration of the comments, which is undertaken by the agency. So I was suggesting, if needed, to provide a fair opportunity to comment, or fair opportunity to prepare comments, or adequate opportunity to prepare comments.
All right.
Or
Okay.
maybe just if needed and leave it at there.
Okay.
Appropriate, but
Yeah. I think that this language was built on comments that you made, Ron, if I'm remembering correctly. I guess
Yes, but I think we want to look at it in terms of what the agency needs, and the preparation by the opposing commentators is a means to that end. But I would think you might want to say here, providing an additional period for comment if needed for fair deliberations regarding the rule.
Is it a matter of fairness or adequacy?
Adequate.
Okay. So for adequate deliberation on the rule.
And you could possibly add in light of the comments received, but I think that's probably superfluous.
Okay. And Michael, I can see you're intensely focused here,
yeah.
suggesting that there might be a response.
Maybe we should propose civil service. Notice. I guess I'm still tripping under adequate deliberation. Maybe, I mean, Ron, the idea is you the purpose of the additional comment period would be to ensure that the agency has all the materials it needs. Is that the idea?
Yes, I mean, we are talking, I mean, I agree with the idea behind your point, which is if somebody submitted the significant adverse comment, somebody didn't realize at that time it was important to take the opposite view, says, oh my God, now they're going to go forward with it. Now I want to submit some.
Yeah.
So that does refer to the preparation of comments by others. But I was hoping we could say so that the rule makers will have the benefit of both sides.
Bill?
I'm just a little confused here. We're talking only about the companion proceeding.
Yeah.
And so the companion proceeding, there's a notice of proposed rulemaking in the proposed rulemaking section of the CFR or of the Federal Register. And it says in that notice of proposed rulemaking, submit comments by such and such a date or not. I mean, normally a notice of proposed rulemaking says, you know, so if you want your comments to be considered, submit them by such and such a date, right? That's what happens in a notice of proposed rulemaking. Is that going to happen in this one, in this companion? And if so, additional to what? I'm just really confused about this in terms of the companion proceeding. Can somebody help me with that? I mean, normally the proposed rulemaking has a date by which you're supposed to submit comments. Does that happen in a direct final rulemaking where you make a notice of proposed rulemaking at the same time?
Well, I can't tell you from experience, but that is by definition what it invites.
I agree. And so if then are we saying in that notice of proposed rulemaking, it will have an additional period of comment beyond the date on the direct final rulemaking?
No, it's the choice an agency makes later to, oh, God, to my surprise, we received adverse comments. Now,
all right.
we want to provide reply.
So it's not when they do the notice of proposed rulemaking, it's later.
I think that's right.
Okay, all right. If so, then I don't think then we shouldn't say in such companion proceedings, say something along the lines of upon receiving significant adverse comments, the agency should consider providing an additional period for comment, blah, blah, blah. Correct?
Yes, I think that is correct, at least in substance.
Laura?
So it would be in the companion proceeding that you would be allowing the additional comment. Basically, what a lot of agencies do, they publish the direct final rule. It has a comment period for the adverse comments. They also have an NPRM that's published that has the comment period for the NPRM. But a lot of times those the NPRM comment period is not significantly longer than the comment period on the DFR. And so by the time the agency has made a decision on whether or not there were any significant adverse comments, the comment period on the NPRM has already closed. And so this is basically, does the agency need to reopen the comment period on the NPRM in order for the public to have an opportunity to comment on it if they didn't comment because they didn't think there were going to be significant adverse comments?
I take that point. I think we're getting an understanding of what happens. All right. It's now a phraseology issue. And it's this whole section, this whole paragraph, number 3, is only about the companion proceeding. It's not about the direct final rule itself. It's the companion proceeding. And so I don't think you need to say in this sentence we're arguing about in such companion proceedings, because that's what this paragraph is about. I think your whole idea that upon receiving adverse significant adverse comments, the agency should consider providing additional period for comment. And we could say in the companion proceeding, except now the direct final rules out of the way. So I don't even think you need that. I just think you should say, after receiving significant adverse comment, comma, agency should consider providing additional period for comment.
Okay. Annalise?
Yeah, I kind of agree that it doesn't necessarily need to refer to the companion proceeding. Is, for example, well, I think Department of Transportation is in the minority. We don't always pursue a companion proceeding. It's always done in the same proceeding. So if it just said, in the event that adverse comment is received, that agency should consider providing additional time for comment, it seems like it meets the intent.
Michael?
I'm happy with all that. I'm still tripping over this adequate deliberation alternative, which I just think is not what we're talking about. The reason for allowing an additional period of comment is to provide a fair opportunity for commenters, right? Or, you know, the whole concern here is that folks will not have had a chance to comment because they wouldn't have realized that it was important to do so until it's too late. So this is for the sake of commenters to ensure that they have the adequate opportunity. It's just not about the agency's deliberation on the rule. So one could just put a period after for comment, but I think it would be better to explain why they might extend or reopen the comment period. And that is to enable to enable a fair opportunity to comment. That's it in a nutshell. I don't know that it's worth going into more detail than that.
My view is we can go either way, but if we take Michael's approach, I would insert the word reply before the last comment.
The additional period for reply comment?
To prepare reply comments.
To prepare for reply comments. Michael, do you have feelings or views on that suggested amendment?
I'm okay with that.
So was it to prepare for reply comment?
To prepare reply comments.
Oh, to prepare.
And submit. Actually, it's submit, isn't it?
To submit reply comments, or to prepare and submit reply comments?
Doesn't submit what you mean, Michael?
That does the trick.
It needs to submit reply
Can't
comments.
submit them without replying. I mean, without preparing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, that's true.
ChatGPT will prepare them, then you reply.
All right.
You submit them.
I mean, do we want to just say something if needed to, for the agency to request and respond to additional comments, something like that? Because it's kind of both. It's commenters need potentially the opportunity to provide additional comments, and the agency needs to respond to them.
But it doesn't have to reopen or have a new period to respond to them. The response comes after they are all submitted. This is just a chance to allow for commenting. That's what the additional period is.
Elena?
Sorry, I'm a little confused about whether we are talking about public commenters replying to other commenters, or if we're talking about the agency responding to public comments that were submitted.
The former.
Okay. I'm not sure that's clear from what we have so far.
It's not clear if we leave in adequate deliberation.
No, no one wants that.
I mean, to me, reply comments doesn't have any meaning. I mean, I know what those two words mean separately, but without additional context,
I mean, to simplify things, right? I mean, do we need to say what it's needed for? I mean, can we just add additional period for comment if needed?
I think that's right.
yeah, sometimes simpler is better, right?
Yeah.
I don't even know if you need if needed because that's implicit in consider.
Sure. Okay, we could stop at comments or comment. Bill.
I agree with that decision. I just would want to say that I also like in the event adverse comment is received as opposed to my after receiving.
Okay.
But it should be in the event significant adverse comment is received.
Okay. All right.
But active voice.
Committee on Style.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments on recommendation 3? Okay. And so as it stands with recommendation 4, we have removed 4D. I think that's something that Daniel very much supports. Daniel?
So I've been thinking about this a lot because this paragraph is crucial to probably most of the rulemaking our agency does because of the way Congress has created our statute. So 4A is a change to what we have now in 95.4. And it's the more I thought about it, the more I realized how big a change it is. Right now, 95.4 says explains why. So explains why is very important because simply challenging the rule's premise without an explanation of why that relates to the direct final rulemaking, that's easy to do. Anyone can submit a challenge saying, I don't like the premise of your rule. I don't like what Congress did that set you up for this rulemaking. So explains why is very important. And the way 95.4 says it is right. Explains why the rule would be inappropriate, including challenges to the rule's underlying premise or approach. So it ties the explanation to the direct final rulemaking, as opposed to just the challenge to the premise, which is statutory. So when we get a challenge saying, Congress created your statute this way, we don't like it. That's a challenge to the premise. But if it doesn't explain why that should undo our rulemaking, then we don't need to treat it as a significant adverse comment because there's nothing we can do in our rulemaking to change that. So I would use the language we have in 95.4, which is explains why the rule would be inappropriate, including challenges to the rule's underlying premise or approach for A.
And so that would replace, let me see, explain why it would be ineffective or unacceptable.
So replace A with the language we have right now on page 3 of 95.4, which is
would that replace A and B or just A is what I'm curious about.
I think B is different. So
Okay.
I think this is just A.
Okay.
And that is how I think that's how 95.4 is written also, that it treats that differently.
Okay.
Those are alternatives. So for A, I would just copy what 95.4 says, explains why the rule would be inappropriate, including challenges to the rule's underlying premise or approach, because that requires the explanation and it ties it to the rulemaking.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. So the language in 95.4 is in the comment box, suggested replacement of A, stopping at approach in the sentence in the comment box. Any objections to that suggested revision to 4A? So why don't we make that adjustment to the
And
language?
so Bertrand, could you just clarify exactly the language you want me to?
Yeah, let's.
say?
So explains, it will start with explains. In the comment box, you would have in the second line, it starts with explains why, and then it concludes with approach in the fourth line of the sentence in the paragraph in the comment box. Does that explain? So explains why the rule would be inappropriate, including challenges to the rule's underlying premise or approach.
Well, since they all start with explains now, you can put explains up in the.
Yeah, okay, sure, exactly.
So we're replacing A with that language, and then we're gonna.
And then we're gonna just and then after it explains why, and then we'll take out explains why and all A, B, and C. Ben's doing that. I'll call on Annalise.
That's just a question. What type of a comment would C, like, what would a comment under C look like? I just don't think I've ever seen anything like that, so I'm just interested to know what this is trying to capture.
Yeah.
I mean, I can jump in. I think it's getting to this idea that if commenters say that the good cause exemption doesn't apply because comment is necessary, you know, it's not unnecessary for purposes of the exemption. So it's the opposite of unnecessary. Does that make sense or no?
Well, I guess I understand that, but like practically speaking, if somebody just said, I think comment is necessary, would an agency have to consider that as a significant adverse comment without any additional information? I feel like it would need A or B to support it.
I guess it would be,
It's introduced by saying, explaining why notice and comment rulemaking is necessary.
So I guess it's trying to be kind of a catch-all for other reasons why notice and comment would be necessary, I guess.
I mean, it could be, the comment could be, this is a really important matter because it affects hundreds of thousands of people in ways that affects lots of money. Therefore, people should be able to comment on it. I mean, that would be, I think, a significant adverse comment as to why notice and comment is necessary. Doesn't have to say we think the rule is wrong, but it's why it has to be commented on because it's a big deal. You thought it wasn't.
Okay.
Any other comments or objections to the changes to paragraph 4 or recommendation 4? Okay, so scrolling down. Yes, Michael.
Sorry, because I still had this comment that was in the margin there.
Oh, sorry. Do we miss that? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
sorry about that.
So there are two aspects to this comment. Take the second one first, which I think is completely consistent with everything that's been said, but I would still suggest, the underlying problem here and part of what Daniel was talking about was, you can make an assertion, which is a challenge, which is completely unfounded and shouldn't count as a significant adverse comment. And he gave the example, and I gave the example of, Congress has required you to undertake this rulemaking. If the comment is, I think this is a bad idea, that's not a significant adverse comment. I was suggesting inserting in before the colon, and now I guess inserting before explains the word plausibly. In other words, just to get at this idea that there has to be some substance to the objection. It's not just the nature of the objection, but it has to be substantial in some way. Now, maybe the way A has been revised makes that a little less salient, but still, I think I would still suggest it.
Okay. So the addition of the language plausibly, Ron.
So I've come around to agreeing with Daniel on this issue after having traded some exchanges back and forth. But I think the right thing to do here is what it does now, which is to track the 95-4 criteria exactly. Because we don't really have a track record of that those criteria have worked out poorly. Daniel and I had some discussions of whether the one case at his agency was wrong. Maybe whoever's right. That's just one occasion, but by and large, we don't have a study that indicates that the criteria that we have now aren't working well. We don't have a track record that says implausible objections are made or ultra vires objections are being made. I think we should, and it's peripheral to the main purpose of this resolution anyway. So I think we should just let it stand as it exists and call it a day. So I would not add plausible or the the ultra-virus example, also in Michael's comment.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Daniel.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with that. I wouldn't add plausibly because we don't want a plausible explanation. We want a really good explanation. We engaged in direct final rulemaking because we were pretty sure there's nothing could change it. So we need something very clear that very clearly says you're wrong, not just a plausible challenge that someone could raise later. So I would also delete plausibly.
Bill.
Me too.
Okay.
Okay, I withdraw the suggestion about plausibly. The second concern, and again, maybe I'm overthinking this. You know, this reads like an exhaustive statement of all the things that might be significant adverse comment. And so if it doesn't fall into A or B or C, it's not a significant adverse comment. And I'm just not convinced that all possible significant adverse comments are covered by A, B, and C. That now, again, it depends on how broadly A is read, but just reassure me that, you know, if someone says, not just plausibly, but clearly correctly, that there's something in this proposal that violates the statute. It's not about the underlying premise or approach. It's a particular thing the agency's doing that's just prohibited by the statute. Why is that covered by A, B, or C?
Because it says inappropriate, including, etc.
So inappropriate means illegal.
Can.
Okay. I
Or
mean,
unacceptable in B.
Annalise.
Sorry, I just can't, I'm still a little hung up on C. You know, I was thinking about the example that Bill provided in which somebody says, oh, this is going to impact tons of people. You should go out for notice and comment. And then the agency, for example, does that and doesn't receive any substantive comments, right? Because presumably if somebody said this is going to impact tons of people, they should also provide a substantive reason why it would impact said people, right? Or they could identify a group and say, oh, you haven't considered the tribes. They're going to have a lot of comments. And then the agency doesn't receive them. If somebody is impacted by the rulemaking, they have the opportunity during the direct final rulemaking comment period to provide their substantive comments. So I think that basically saying, oh, we think that this is going to impact people is not actually useful to the agency to help them determine whether or not notice and comment is necessary.
If we're talking about C, I'll still just say that it starts off by saying explaining why. And if it explains why notice and comment rulemaking is necessary, that ought to be a significant adverse comment. I mean, it almost goes without saying that they explain why notice and comment rulemaking is necessary. That's a significant adverse comment.
But in your example, you said it impacts tons of people. There are lots of rules that impact tons of people for which notice and comment is not necessary.
Well, I said more than impacts tons of people in various ways that will be harmful to them. And imagine you get 1,000 comments, each of which says, we want to comment. We think this is a big deal. Wouldn't
But
that?
if none of them provided any substantive comments, I don't know that that's necessarily, I mean, I think that the agency should consider and perhaps extend the comment period to seek those substantive comments, but those aren't adverse to the rulemaking. Those are just looking for more opportunity to comment.
No, they're not adverse to the rulemaking. They're adverse to adverse to adopting the notice and comment. They're adverse to the good cause exception.
So, I mean, one question I have is I'm sorry, I don't remember. Is this language in 95.4, Ben, that we're drawing from?
It's not.
Edition, C. And Annalise, the concerns that you raised, what do you see as the problem of including this in 4?
Just for example, that it would provide an easy opportunity for somebody to say, oh, I think that notice and comment is necessary because it impacts this group of people. It has an impact on this group of people. Under this recommendation, an agency might feel obligated to go out for notice and comment, rulemaking, reopen it, waste their time when no substantive comments on the rulemaking are forthcoming.
Thanks.
If there's a substantive comment on the rulemaking, they have an opportunity to provide that during the direct final rulemaking comment period. So I think
They
that
only get 30 days under the direct final rulemaking. It may be that they need more time than 30 days in order to do that.
sure,
I mean,
and I think that asking for oh, sorry, didn't mean to come off.
So, I mean, the question here is notice and comment unnecessary, right? And if lots of people want to comment on the rule, right, then it seems to me that comment is necessary. I mean, it just seems to say it's unnecessary, it's uncontroversial, nobody cares, and then people say we care. That's a significant adverse comment. I don't see it. It's not just adverse to the fundamentals of the rule. It's also adverse to doing away with notice and comment. They have to explain why, and it has to be, it has to explain why people would want to comment. But I don't think.
I want to allow Annalise to respond, and then if Daniel wants to chime in with comments based on the fact that your agency does a lot of DFRs, and then we'll come to Ron.
I was just going to say that I think that an agency, if they, for example, received one comment like this saying, we think the comment is necessary here, but no substantive comment on the rule itself, then like as an agency, I would probably prefer to extend that comment period to give people an opportunity to provide comment to determine whether or not notice and comment, rather than going back and going through the whole notice and NPRM process. That's probably the approach that I'd prefer to take to determine whether or not notice and comment is necessary based on whether or not there are substantive concerns with the rule.
Great. Thanks, Annalise. Daniel?
I do agree that I'm not exactly sure what it means, and it's not in 95.4. I didn't really see it as an impediment to our rulemaking because I sort of read it as the opposite of what the APA says. The APA says, when for good cause you find that notice and public procedure are unnecessary. So I saw that as the opposite. This is saying it is necessary. So it kind of negates the good cause finding fundamentally. I'm not sure how it would actually apply, and I would be fine with deleting it because I can't foresee something that fulfills this, but also because of that, I don't necessarily have a problem keeping it because I just don't see it doing anything.
Got it. Okay. Ron,
Annalise, let me give you imagine 15 different organizations write in and say, we think notice and comment is necessary here because we have a lot to say, right? And we think this is an important rule. We should have an opportunity to comment on it. And you say, oh, and you say that's not a significant adverse comment. And so the rule goes forward. Then they challenge your rule, right? And say, they didn't go through notice and comment. And we all said we wanted to comment. How does the court going to rule on that? I don't have any question how the court's going to rule on that. They're going to say that was an illegal use of the good cause exception. I don't, I just don't see how you could come out any other way.
I think in that circumstance, yeah, I think an agency would appropriately want to go out for put out an NPRM. But if they receive, for example, it says an agency should consider any comment received to be a significant adverse comment if it explains why notice and comment rulemaking is necessary. If it, for example, one entity provides a comment without a lot of substantive background and then just says, we know that this significantly impacts, all of the tribes in our area, for example, and you should go out for notice for an NPRM, the agency under this recommendation might feel compelled to go out for an NPRM when it's not necessarily appropriate in that circumstance. I'm just saying the agencies can probably make
that by putting in plausibly.
Duly noted, Michael. Thank you for that intervention. Okay, so Annalise, would your suggestion be to delete C?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a proposal to delete C.
I don't accept it. I mean,
okay, there's objections to that proposal. Okay. So I guess we'll just open it up for comments. Any other additional comments, and then we'll just, if we can't come to consensus, have to vote on this matter. Ron?
I wonder if you get closer to what we're trying to say here by making C read explains that the agency does not expect significant controversy regarding the rule. Or expects it to be uncontroversial or something like that. Because that relates directly to the idea that you're making that representation. If someone comes back and says, no, I do want to comment, that means you misapprehended the situation and the non-existence of good cause.
Daniel?
So I do support deleting C. The only reason I would keep C is so that we don't replace it with something else. And a lot of our rules are potentially controversial. Congress transferred to our agency the authority to regulate tiny little orange ends on toy guns. 10,000 people responded and said, don't take away my guns. We didn't consider that significant because we were just transferred the authority over the orange caps on guns. Our rule didn't do anything except transfer the CFR from one place to another, but it was very controversial. It got a huge amount of comments. So I would either just delete C and have nothing, or keep C if it means that we don't change it to something else.
So I'll withdraw my suggestion in light of that remark, and you can decide about C or not either way.
Okay. Michael?
See, I'd be amenable to deleting it.
Deleting it. Okay. Thanks, Ron. Michael?
I was going to suggest the other way of doing this, I think sort of along the way lines of Ron's suggestion, is explains why the agency's good cause determination was unfounded, or the agency, well, something along those lines, right? That
Was in error, was in error.
Was in error, right? I mean, that's what Bill is talking about. I think it's responsive to Annalise's concerns and so on.
Okay, so good cause determination was an error. Daniel, is that worse than just keeping it?
Yeah, ultimately, I think 95.4 works. So any change to it could have unforeseen consequences, which is why I would just delete C entirely. But why our determination was an error, that's basically A. If our whole premise was wrong and that ties it to the rulemaking, then that's covered already in A. So I wouldn't add something new that suggests there was something missing before, and you need to expand the types of significant adverse, what you're considering to be a significant adverse comment.
And I think I would note, kind of in agreement with Daniel in this respect, that a comment was made earlier that we haven't done the reporting or expert reporting on DFRs in terms of these explanations, and I don't know if we have a basis for changing 95.4, so that should be a consideration that we engage in light of the lack of evidence about how this recommendation is working in practice. Elena?
I do agree with removing C, but because I agree with what Annalise said, that it would be based in A or B if you thought comment was necessary because of something in A or B. But if we were to keep what is I'm going to call new C here, I think I would rather say unfounded than in error. I just don't really like the phrase in error.
So I think that we have kind of the proposal on the table to delete C or to include in C this new language.
I would accept the new language.
Okay. Other comments? I could just take it to the vote since we don't have agreement on this point. If we don't have any additional comments, Daniel?
Yeah, I think my final comment is just the point that you made, that this has worked for decades. Making changes without really thinking through what they mean or why we're doing them, I think is a bad idea. I haven't had, this was just proposed, so I haven't had a lot of time to think through why this would not be good. All I know is that this is a change from what's been done before. So it's probably added for some reason that is something we haven't covered before, which would complicate our rulemaking by giving us some new category of significant adverse comments that we hadn't had. Or if it doesn't do that, then it's already covered by A and B and we don't need it.
And the concern, even if it is already covered by A and B, that there may be some who assume that because it's a separate category, it must mean something different.
Right, or there may be something in here that just in the last 2 minutes I haven't caught, and someone may argue later. So I think it doesn't add anything. A and B have worked and cover all the key bases for why an agency might be wrong with its direct final rulemaking.
Well, I would just say that as my final word is that I view C as adding something new because it's not an attack on the rule itself. It's an attack on the failure to provide notice and comment.
Kevin?
Yeah, I don't know if this is already there, but A does say the rule would be inappropriate, and that could include a procedural reason why it's inappropriate. So it would render C sort of included within the inappropriate. Now, it doesn't spell out exactly why the rule will be inappropriate. That would be, I guess, nudging towards Daniel's direction of not wanting to add without something that sounds like it's been working.
Ron?
Yeah, I think I'm with Daniel. If we add this language, general counsel's offices across the establishment will assign somebody to do a memo on how the criteria are different now.
Okay, I give up.
All right.
I give up.
We have, okay, so now we are at any other objections to removing C? Okay, C is deleted.
Now you need an or between A and B.
So, or, thank you. Okay, so let's move down to any other comments on anything else that we have here. Okay, so we'll go to, what is that, 8G. And this is where the sunset language that we talked about last meeting was added. The question if there are any concerns about that sunset language that's been added to 8G.
Again, this is a stylistic thing, but originally it was in a separate paragraph and it was at the end. Seems like it could work better in G and maybe going before H, which kind of leads into 9. But again, it's just a stylistic thing.
I guess we're just trying to capture, does it change the meaning of the recommendation that we were proposing? So I'll give you guys time.
I did use the word expiration date. Miriam isn't here, but the document drafting handbook doesn't, I don't think, use the word sunset date, but recommendation 95-4, I believe, does. So if folks have a preference between expiration versus sunset, happy to change that. I think it's a non-substantive difference.
I prefer expiration.
Hearing any objections to 9G's stylistic change? Okay, could scroll down further, and then H was revised consistent with our recommendations from last meeting.
Again, I cleaned this up because it was getting a little bit messy, but we had and then we kind of had a discussion too in this meeting, but this idea of, do we want to say final rule? Do we want to say replacement rule? That we use, someone suggested at the last meeting, new final rule, but again, we can change that. But I think we're just trying to get to the idea of that the rule could reaffirm, modify, or withdraw the interim rule. And Miriam was making the point before that even if you're just reaffirming a rule, you still publish a document in the rules and regulations section of the Federal Register, but you don't modify the CFR text. So trying to get to all that in this edit.
And so in 9, we do use the language, a new final rule.
Yeah, 8H and 9 are just use similar language. Again, we can modify, we can say,
Oh,
we
yeah,
want to
so
say
new
new
final
final
rule,
rule, we can do something
okay,
else. If we don't
got
want
it.
to say reaffirm, modify, withdraw. But that was the language Trying to
Got
take
it.
all the input that we got in the last meeting together and
Sure.
come up with that.
Sure. Ron.
So just a factual question. If the agency doesn't intend to change it, would agencies ever just say, put in a brief notice that says we decided not to change it? Or do they reprint it at that time?
Any agency members want to comment, Annalise?
So I don't know where exactly the requirement comes from. It might just be like a bureaucratic one, but we can't, I don't think that the rulemaking is closed for the purposes of the unified agenda until you issue a final rule. I might be wrong about that, but my understanding is that we can't stop putting it in the unified agenda until we've issued a final rule. So I think you have to publish something that's called a final rule. Maybe another document that says that would be possible, but I don't think, sorry, I don't have enough information, but I know that that's the standard of practice we use.
Thanks, Annalise. Bill.
As I understood, is Miriam the Federal Register person?
Yes.
Yeah, and she couldn't make it today, unfortunately.
Yeah, but as I understood, what she said last time was that they put a notice in the rule, in the rule section that says they have adopted the rule and refer back to what was the interim final rule. They don't actually republish the text of it. They just say that they're adopting that text. That's what I understood her to be.
Right. Elena.
I think that we would publish a final rule because we would have economic analysis and the like associated that we would need to publish to accompany even finalizing an interim final rule. It's been a while since we don't do a lot of interim final rules, so it's been a while, but I think that's the appropriate take.
Got it.
So maybe we could.
Which maybe also means there's not a standard approach here. Maybe.
Right.
So, and my understanding is that what Miriam said, this would cover the new language we have here would cover what Miriam said. So I don't think it creates a problem.
Jeff.
I'm not recommending a change necessarily, but we talked last time about when the effective date starts running. Does it start running from, if the agency says we're just adopting the original rule, does the effective date runs from the time the original rule was published, or does it run from the time the agency announces that we're adopting the original rule? And of course, there's a good cause exemption for the effective date as well.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this last time.
Yeah, I know.
And I thought we decided that we shouldn't say anything about it because this really had to do about public engagement, not effective dates.
Right. That is what we decided. We thought it'd be opening up a can of worms to try to get into the question of.
But it might bear on what the agency does. I mean, depending on what the rule is for effective dates. You know, if they don't want to, if they want the rule to go into effect immediately, they'll just publish a notice. If they want to give people 30 days to get ready, then they can republish it.
Amy.
I'm just going to say with the Federal Register, if there's a direct final or an interim final rule, the material is going to be codified on that effective date. That's why Miriam was talking about the agencies when they issue a second document that doesn't change the text of the final rule, they don't republish the text, the CFR text. If that's helpful at all.
Right.
It's a effective date discussion.
Right. Thanks, Amy. In the limited time that we have, I'm not sure we're gonna come to a conclusion on the question. We did have an extended discussion. I think we're missing some helpful input from Miriam and perhaps others. Ron?
So are we still struggling on final terminology question?
I mean, yeah, there is that language, new final rule, both in 8 and 9, or 8H and 9, that we can decide to keep and address at the plenary, or think of a different label for the.
Yeah. So I was going to suggest in H, consider the comments and complete the rulemaking proceeding by reaffirming, modifying, withdrawing. Then you wouldn't need a term at
Okay.
all.
So can complete the proceeding, rulemaking proceeding. Rulemaking by reaffirming, modifying, or withdrawing interim final rule. Okay.
But I would let this committee on style work on
Yeah.
it.
Okay, so we're thinking of ways in which we can avoid using or deciding on the terminology of new, replacement, successor, substitute, final, whatever we came up with. We'll have to do that also with 9. Okay, we'll have that spirit in mind as we go forward with respect to making the stylistic adjustments. Annalise.
Just along those same lines, another option that I'd, just issue an action finalizing the rulemaking.
Issue an action finalizing the rulemaking. Okay. So that could be other language that we also incorporate as considering for the stylistic adjustment to 8H and 9.
And I'll just channel Andrew Emery here. I mean, he was raising the point at previous meetings that interim final rules are final rules, and we don't want to imply that agencies have to do so, even though we're recommending that they should do so. So I think that's why we've avoided phrases like finalize the rule or complete the rule, because we don't want to imply that the rule itself is not final, the interim final rule, that is.
But if they don't do anything, all right, then they're subject to a lawsuit complaining about the invocation of the good cause exception. If they do issue a new final rule, then that sort of makes the little sister situation come in, and it doesn't matter whether they had good cause.
Right. Okay, so we have that spirit. Are there any other comments that we have with respect to 8H in particular? If not, we'll kind of move down, see if there are any other sort of relevant comments that we need to address here, going down to 10 or 11.
One of the other comments in 9 was this debate that I think it was, or discussion among at least Mark and Bill and potentially others about whether to have
Oh
a
yeah, the
specific time period.
timeline. Yeah, this was actually, this was.
In light of the time and of my sense of the room, I withdraw my insistence or suggestion for a timeline.
Okay. I think that
The main,
is-
and the main change in 11 was this suggestion from Alex about adding references to periodic retrospective review.
Right. And that
I think
was,
this language is pretty similar to his. It's just modified for style, but substantively, I think it's the same.
yeah. And just make sure there's no objections from Alex. I think we could move forward. And then we have, the change
that
with
looks good to
12.
me.
As Alex, you said, that's fine.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. And then we had this change with respect to referencing the ex parte communication recommendation rather than spelling it out. In 12 was a change here. Okay. All right. So I think if there are no other questions or objections, we'll vote. Okay. So here the committee members will have a vote, and with a show of hands of the committee members who support approving these recommendations and sending them to the council, please raise your hand now. Raise my hand. Where is the hand? Okay. And okay, we'll lower your hands now. And is there anyone that objects disapproves sending this to the council. Same, recommendations with the entire ACUS, with all of ACUS. Okay. Says my connection's unstable. I hope you guys can still hear me now. So thank you all for making it through this process. It was arduous and challenging at times, but we made it through with a set of recommendations.
And we just lost Bertrand.
Yeah, it sounds like Bertrand, we're losing Bertrand, but I just want to, I don't know if Andy wants to weigh in at this last second here, but thank you all again.
Yeah.
And did you have any last minute remarks? Bertrand, can
I'm
you?
sorry, it took me a second to press all the buttons. Yeah, Ben, thank you. I just want to thank all of you for what was, I'm sure it felt to you like a grueling process, and to some of us as well. I don't know whether this is the record or not, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is my appreciation for the care and the thought and the effort that so many of you put into this. And I really appreciate that you care so much about the final product and work so hard on it. So we'll get this out to the council for next week and see what they do and take it up again on December 12th. So thanks very much. And a special thanks to Ben and Bertrand and to Mark for their special efforts.
Thanks, everyone.